Hypothesis testing, hypothesis test conclusions. So we began by talking about how to establish the null hypothesis and the alternative hypothesis. And then we talked about type 1 and type 2 errors and our level of significance, trying to prevent type 1 errors. And here we're going to state our conclusion to our hypothesis tests. Caution, and in a box, in red, in large letters, we never accept the null hypothesis, okay? In our conclusion, we never accept the null hypothesis because without having access to the entire population, we never will know the exact value of the parameter stated in the null hypothesis. Okay, so we're never going to know that exact value. We're hypothesizing. Okay, so we never totally accept it. We just fail to reject it. Rather, we say that we fail to reject the null hypothesis. As we've been discussing with our court system, this is just like our court system. We never declare a defendant innocent, but rather we say that the defendant is not guilty. Okay? In other words, we did not have enough evidence to prove guilt. However, this does not mean the person is indeed innocent. Okay, let's take a look at our Medco example and how we would state conclusions. Okay, let's get my paper straight here. Again, our Medco pharmaceutical company has developed a new antibiotic for children. 2% of children taking competing antibiotics experience headaches as a side effect. The researcher wants to know if the percentage of children taking the new antibiotic who experience headaches as a side effect is more than 2%. Let's remind ourselves our null hypothesis, which the probability is equal to 0.02. Our alternative hypothesis, H sub A or H sub 1, is our probability is greater than 0.02. Okay? How would we write our conclusion if we reject the null hypothesis? I don't have a ton of space here, so kind of, be a little on the smaller side as you're writing. Okay? All right, so if we reject the null hypothesis, okay, so basically what we're saying here is the null hypothesis, okay, and this is it. P is equal to 0.02. Is rejected. Okay, so we believe the alternative. Hypothesis. So this is what's happening, okay? If we reject the null hypothesis, what we're saying is we're rejecting that P is equal to 0.02 in this case. We believe P is greater than 0.02. What does our conclusion look like in words? Okay, our conclusion. There is sufficient evidence to conclude that the number of children who experience a headache as a side effect is more than 0.02. Okay, so again, we write our conclusion dealing with the alternative hypothesis. So we're saying here, we rejected the null. There is sufficient evidence to conclude that the number of children who experience a headache as a side effect is more than 0.02. We are writing our conclusion based from the perspective of the alternative hypothesis. Okay, so all focusing here with our conclusion. Okay, so what is our conclusion if we fail to reject the null hypothesis? Okay, what does this mean? Okay, this means that the null hypothesis, again, the null hypothesis is the probability or the proportion, the probability, 0.02 is not rejected. We failed to reject it. It's not rejected. Okay, so we do not believe the alternative hypothesis. Okay, so again, when we fail to reject the null hypothesis, what we're saying is we're not rejecting the null, so we do not believe the alternative. Okay, what does that look like in words as our conclusion? And again, our conclusion is written using the alternative hypothesis. There is not sufficient evidence to conclude that the number of children who experience a headache as a side effect is more than 0.02. Okay, so again, everything is in our conclusions are always written regarding the alternative hypothesis. If we fail to reject the null, what we're saying in our conclusion, there is not sufficient evidence to conclude that the number of children who experience a headache as a side effect is more than 0.02. Okay, so never accept the null hypothesis. We never accept it. Okay, we either reject it or we fail to reject it, and our conclusions are always written using the alternative hypothesis.